Okay, and we are recording. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Kapil Kumar. I'm one of the directors of the 22Q Family Foundation. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. For those that are going to be watching later, thank you for watching our recording. Tonight, I have a very special guest with us. Donna is a very good friend of the Family Foundation and a huge supporter and contributor to our efforts. And she's going to be talking about Social Security, disability insurance and SSI. Donna is an educational consultant, speaker, author, and advocate who plans special education programs on behalf of children with 22q deletion syndrome and others with complicated learning needs. She's a retired educator who spent 36 years in the classroom teaching kids in grades K through 8. She's also was an advisor to gifted program in Middleton Cross Plains area school district in Wisconsin. She served as a cooperating teacher with the School of Education for the University of Wisconsin-Madison for 15 years and won an Excellence in Teaching Award in Economics Education. Since 1994, she's been actively involved in issues related to 22Q. That includes being the past president and U.S. regional director for the Cardiofacial Education Foundation, serving on the board for 22Q International, and consulting for us, the 22Q Family Foundation, as well as for the VCFS Virtual Center. In 2008, she literally wrote the book on educating kids with VCFS, and it's called Educating Children with Velocardiofacial Syndrome. It's now in its second edition, with the third edition slated for publication later this year. She's presented to groups throughout the U.S. on 22Q issues, and also produced teacher training webcasts and special needs and a book for children with special needs entitled So, What's the Difference? Her website is www.cutler-landsman.com. Donna, thank you as always for joining us. I'm going to turn over the hosting to you so that you can present your screen.
All right. Hi, everybody, from rainy evening here in Madison, Wisconsin, and I am thrilled to be here today and share with you this PowerPoint presentation that I pulled together after consulting really with hundreds and hundreds of families with this syndrome. I felt that this is really a pressing issue with a lot of families. It's really figuring out a path forward for their young adults that are getting ready to graduate high school and move off on their own, and how to best prepare for that eventuality. So I'm going to go through a set of slides today explaining a little bit about Social Security and community supports. And then I think we're going to have some time at the end of this for some questions and answers. We are always available here at the 22Q Family Foundation to help you. And if you have questions beyond this tonight presentation, just reach out and we are available. So I think the first thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is setting future goals for your young adult. I think, we all as parents, and I have a child with this syndrome that's now in his 30s, but, we all want these kids to know basic reading, math, and writing. I had a goal for my child, and I think most of you want some type of job. I think working for anybody is a really important part of life, a sense of purpose. A social life with friends and acquaintances so that they're out and about in the community. Being independent and being safe, living outside of their childhood home. Having a stable health situation. Being happy and content with their life and their situation. And also, I think this is the piece that is important, that they're set up to manage without parental or family support. I think we all realize that as parents, and if I'm speaking, mostly out there to parents this evening, that, the reality is we may not always be there. As much as we love our children and want to support them and be there to help them, that may not be feasible long term. So when we're doing this planning for them, we want to be able to set them up so that if we are out of the picture, we feel confident that their needs are going to be met. In order for children with this syndrome really to gain those goals on the previous slide, a really full transition program is essential. And that really starts with the school district. The young adults with 22q, the vast majority of them are really not able to directly leave high school and move off to college without a level of support. Move into that college setting at age 18 as other children are able to do that. Most of the children with this syndrome need some added interventions in order for them to feel confident and have the skills that they need in order for that to happen successfully and safely. Transition planning in the school district is supposed to start at age 14, but it really varies around the country how strong a transition plan the schools put together for children with this particular syndrome. Oftentimes, their idea of a transition plan is a career inventory where they figure out what the kid might like to do, and then they have written on the IEP something like they're planning to go to college. But no thought has really been put into whether or not that child is really able to be independent and self-sufficient on their own at a state well enough that they're going to be able to go to college. Students with 22q typically need a much more complicated and robust program to make that leap to independence. And I feel that IEP teams really have to take a very deep look into a student's skill level and look at their functional skill abilities and plan around those as far as what things are really going to be needed to, for them to be successful. Now, an IEP team, a high school team, high school can go on to age 21. There are also colleges and universities that have programs that are directed toward life skill development and functional skill development. So this particular presentation is not about those issues and those programs, but I just wanted to throw that out there, that there are places that have sprung up, quite a few colleges around the country that provide those types of transition programs.
So Donna, it seems like, I wouldn't have thought of the IEP program, the IEP plans as being more than identifying the supports they need in school, but really this is something that takes them through their transition.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. An IEP, the IEP team, it's not just academics. They're supposed to also provide functional skills for these young adults. So that is part of the IEP, and it's often overlooked. So that's an important piece tonight to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that feeds into also that, just like we advocate for our kids from a young age to get an IEP and to get the services they need, it's to make sure that that doesn't fall off, that they have to have the life skills that they need that are required through the IEP. So that's good to know. I didn't realize that. We have to advocate for a long period of time.
Absolutely. So I wanted to give the community here a little bit of a dose of reality, and this presentation is to arm you with the information I think you need to make some informed choices when you are at your high school programming team meetings and are thinking about whether or not you're going to apply for Social Security, so you understand the parameters of that program and what you're going to need to do in order to apply for those. Adult programming and support for the disabled population in the United States is dependent on qualifying for community services. Community services are funded differently among the states of the United States, but they're usually funded primarily through the federal government. And there's, for a lot of these programs that provide long-term care and some of that scaffolded living support, it requires a disability determination through Social Security in order to be able to be eligible for those programs. So it's kind of a two-pronged system. You have your state system that is your Health and Human Services system, and then the federal program which administers the Social Security. There are three different sources of funding. So we have SSI and SSDI, which is the Social Security federal. You have your state developmental disability programs, which vary from state to state. And then all states have your vocational rehabilitation programs that are more the job programs that will do job training, job coaching, finding jobs, and those programs are open to adults with disabilities. So, you know, there are three, they interplay with each other, and the funding is kind of interesting, but to get the level of that long-term care support, there's usually a Social Security requirement in order for somebody to be funded through that. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about applying for Social Security and what you need to get together and what that system requires for application. In my experience in dealing with a lot of families here over the years is that adults with 22q usually need a moderate amount of support that can be expensive for families to self-fund for the long term. But simply having the syndrome, simply going to Social Security and saying, I've got a young adult here with 22q11 deletion syndrome, that is not enough to qualify for services. And in fact, a lot of adults with this diagnosis have been turned down for services through Social Security. So you might wonder, what is it that adults need? You said that most adults need a moderate level of support. Well, here are the things that I see most often that adults with this syndrome need. They need somebody who is their fiscal representative to handle their finances. That math disability does not disappear over time to the level that they can really handle financial decisions as adults. Many of them need assistance on the job, both with the job skills themselves, but moreover with interpersonal relationships at the job setting. So whether or not it's anxiety or feeling uncomfortable in a situation or having a hard time with coworkers or speaking to the boss, those interpersonal relationships can be problematic. Planning and organizing. For example, what do I need to go to the store to buy in order for me to cook meals for the week? What do I need to do in order to invite people over to do something? You know, where are those social opportunities? How do I plan? When do I need to make appointments for all my health issues? And many adults with this have multiple health issues. Is it time to go back for my heart checkup? Is it time to go back to see my primary care doctor? So somebody that's coordinating all those appointments. Case management of medical issues. What medications, how to get the medications, are they bubble packaged? You know, who's making all the appointments? Communication assistance. Particularly things like interpretive services at medical appointments. So if they're at the doctor and they have a problem, are they able to relay what the problem is well, and also understand the directions and the questions that are addressed to them from the doctor? Explanations of services from agencies and how to act on that. Oversight for decision making. Are they making a good purchase if they go out and buy a cell phone product, or if they need a contract for an apartment? Who's overseeing all the contracts and their choices? Many of them need emotional support, you know, with relationship issues. Transportation. Some segment of this population drives and has driver's licenses, but many do not. And you know, when you talk about all of these things, these are things mostly parents are doing as these kids are growing up. But if you take the parents out of the equation and nobody is there to do all of this, you end up having to pay somebody to do it. And that type of support can be expensive. That's the type of support that's provided through the Health and Human Services Department of the developmental disabilities programs by the state. And these services can run well over $20,000 per year for adults that need this level of support. So I just wanted to give you an idea of kind of the typical scenario for children or young adults with the syndrome. Some may be more self-sufficient than this. Some may be less self-sufficient than this.
You know, I think this is almost like what you and I were talking about a little bit before this started with elderly parents, right? A lot of these issues apply to that group as well. And
Mhm.
it's just the ability to articulate it and understand early enough that, hey, these are things that many of us struggle with. And if our kids can get a little bit more assistance, it's not us, they can be a little bit more independent. So it's not necessarily shifting the responsibility. It's just finding ways for them to be able to have a more self-sufficient life where they, I think, feel more like have a little bit more of a sense of pride, right?
Right. And what the goal, with having this community support, instead of the parents taking care of this, a case manager takes care of it. So it's another level. And it doesn't mean that the parents are out of the picture totally, but that case manager is a partner with you as a parent. And then if you need to fade back, that case manager is there to take over. So it's a scaffolding. We talk about a scaffolding of support. So at age 18, when you are looking at Social Security, when your young child with 22Q turns 18, the parent income does no longer counts for eligibility for Social Security. Then the child's income is all that counts. So, most of the time, if they're not working, they are eligible because they have no income coming in at age 18. Social Security will provide a stipend. This is SSI, will provide a monthly stipend for food and for shelter. Now, there are two different programs under Social Security, and they are not the same program. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to explain the differences between the two. And I will put out a statement here saying that I am not an attorney, and Social Security is extremely complicated. There are all kinds of rules, and there are rules that change, legal rules that change all the time. So I had that at the bottom of this screen, that I strongly suggest that you seek legal advice that goes through some of these requirements with you, because I would not want to give legal advice to anybody. It's not my role. So I'm going to talk to you about how 22Q relates to eligibility here, but I think the ins and outs of Social Security, I have somebody dealing with that for me. So there's a benefits specialist that we have contracted with as a family who is hired to do all of that Social Security eligibility and making sure that all the rules are followed, because there's a bunch of rules that go with Social Security. But just the general information is there are two programs: Supplemental Security Income and Social Security Disability Insurance. There's a strict set of criteria that they use to determine eligibility. Applicants, families need to be very, very well prepared with a lot of documentation to prove that they need Social Security. So it's highly recommended that families work with the IEP team as well as medical professionals to have accurate and up-to-date information to present to the Social Security Determination Bureau. I would never suggest that you kind of do this application without a lot of preparation, forethought, and thinking through how to document your child's needs. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time this evening explaining to you what kinds of things you need.
So just to reiterate for the audience real quickly, we have about 21 people that joined. Thank you so much. If you have questions, Donna's going to answer most of the questions at the end. I may interject a few here and there, but if you have questions, just so you don't forget them, there's a Q&A button if you're logged into the webinar that you can click on. Your questions will be logged there. You can also feel free to go ahead and chat. And there's very few things that are Family Foundation specific that we're going to be talking about tonight. Donna, like I said, has been an expert in a lot of these fields and providing support. So one thing we do plan to have, though, is a financial planning webinar. So to the extent that you guys have ideas on other things you want to talk about, let us know, email us separately, or we also want to be able to be as kind of transparent and progressive as we can here. So Donna, go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, the SSI program, which is the needs-based program, and it's the program that most kids with 22q at age 18 will apply for this program. So this is the program for kids with a disability and no work experience or very little work experience. It is based on need, and there's no history of work that's required in order to qualify for this. However, there is an asset limit. You cannot have more than $2,000 in assets. So if your child has $3,000 in the bank and you apply for SSI, your application will be turned down because he's over or she is over the asset limit. So be well aware that they cannot have a lot of money in their name or they're not going to be able to qualify for this. There is a detailed listing of disabilities that determines qualification. We're going to go through some of those in this presentation. SSI usually comes with Medicaid eligibility, and for a lot of families that's extremely important because it's not so much the monthly stipend that you get through the Social Security, but it's the health insurance that comes with it that is really helpful. And Medicaid is a wonderful program. It really pays for a lot of health issues, a lot of health needs. Individuals can work while getting SSI, so it is a misnomer to say that you cannot do any work. You can work, but you're limited to the amount of money that you can earn. And that changes yearly with inflation. I believe this year it's about $1,200 per month that a person can earn and still maintain their disability status. If your assets go over the $2,000 limit and you don't spend that down in that month, your benefits for the following month, if you're over the limit, can be terminated. So it gets very complicated keeping track of all of this. There is a new program, the ABLE accounts. I believe there was a presentation on those accounts where some monies can be funneled into that account that will allow that young adult to stay under that $2,000 asset limit. But again, that's where I think a benefits specialist, somebody that really understands these rules, would be very helpful to families.
And there was some information on that in the webinar that we provided, so people can find that either, I think, on our website or on our YouTube channel, or just email us if you have questions.
The second program is Social Security Disability Insurance. Now, this program is an insurance program for adults who have worked, but who are disabled, but they've paid into the Social Security program over time. And it would be 1.5 years or if you're under age 24. So a lot of kids with 22q might start off on SSI, but if they're working, eventually they can earn enough credits to start being eligible for this other program, which is Social Security Disability Insurance. There is Medicare goes along with this program after 2 years, and again, that there's state issues with Medicaid and Medicare that vary from state to state. There is no unearned income limit, so you can have other income coming in this program, but again, you have a limit as an adult on this program that you can only earn the gainful employment piece, which is $1,220 per month in 2019. If you have children under this program, the children can be eligible for some monies. The rules, though, are basically the same as they are for SSI for qualification. And again, sometimes adults with this will eventually, if they work, be able to qualify for SSDI. So the question is, how does this Social Security Determination Bureau work? How do they decide that this person has a disability and this person doesn't? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this in the context of this syndrome with 22q. So after age 18, Social Security may consider a person disabled if they have a medically determinable physical or mental impairment, but that has to result in the inability to do any substantial gainful activity. So just because they have the syndrome does not satisfy the second piece of this. You have to show that because of this, they can't really hold a full-time job that's going to give them benefits. So they can earn a little bit, but not enough to really sustain themselves. This disability can be expected to result in death, which doesn't apply to this syndrome, but certainly for 22q, this is expected to last for a period not less than 12 months. So this is a lifelong problem. It's not something that's going to be fixed like somebody who was on disability because they had a cancer diagnosis, but after treatments and so on that lasted, they've gone through remission and now they're able to return to work. So this syndrome is not something that is going to go away. So let's talk a little bit about denials. Why are people denied for coverage? Well, 65% of people who apply for Social Security, according to the website online, 65% are denied benefits on the first application. So only 35% are okayed with this. Sometimes there's technical reasons for the application. A lot of times it's a lack of hard medical evidence, prior denial and failure to appeal, so they've lost their opportunity to make an appeal. Their income is over the limit. They have been diagnosed with something, but they have not followed the doctor's recommendations, and they have not adhered to their treatment regimen. They have failed to do the process right or comply with requests from the Bureau. The disability is determined to be due to drugs or alcohol. But I think this last category is the one that is the key category for the syndrome, is that the disability is not, quote unquote, severe enough. So we're going to talk about how do we gather the information for the Determination Bureau in order to paint the picture of what life is like for our young adult with 22q if you feel that they need a program of support as adults.
Donna, do you happen to know what the percentage is for applications that are approved on like subsequent applications?
That's a good question. I know that with appeals that the number of when you go through the appeal, that percentage goes up. So there's more people going through. And especially if you pull together an attorney and have a really good appeal, those cases sometimes are overturned. I mean, I just had one recently with a family from Texas who went through an appeals process and finally they were approved. So I think, however, it's expensive. You have to hire an attorney. And so I'd like to give the information now up front, so hopefully families can get approved from the get-go rather than having to go through the appeals process. So that's going to be the goal.
It sounds
right.
like,
go ahead.
But like, you're going to talk about the type of evidence that you need, but
Yes.
The few things from the slide specifically is, adhere to what the doctors say, follow the process and comply with their requests, and just make sure that you're thorough in the paperwork because they're looking for technicalities and it's government bureaucracy as we can imagine. So,
right.
But I know you're going to cover a lot of stuff. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So what are the work activities that are considered? Well, many kids with 22q have physical limitations. So is your child, do they have hypertonia? Is there scoliosis? Are there problems that they have with flexible joints where they can't stand for a long period of time, clubfoot, whatever those physical limitations are. The second piece of this, understanding, remembering, and carrying out simple instructions. Well, that is a lot of kids with this syndrome that will limit more complicated employment because understanding and remembering what they're supposed to do and carrying it out quickly with fidelity can be a problem. Using judgment, problem solving is an issue with the syndrome. Responding appropriately to supervision. If they're corrected, is there anxiety? Do they have a hard time relating socially? So that can be a piece. And also dealing with changes. So a lot of these things do fall into the category of many kids with 22q having bits and pieces of all of these kinds of work activities that could cause limitation. But for an impairment to be considered severe, it has to significantly limit the ability to do basic work activities. So again, how do we pull together evidence of the disability? Well, first of all, you have to have documented evidence from specific sources. So they're looking for doctors' notes, therapists, vocational counselors, educational staff, medical personnel, mental health professionals, and families. You can't just supply evidence yourself. You have to have documented evidence from people who are treating your child. The kinds of evidence that they're looking for are specific lab tests, neuropsychological evaluations, that would be a cognitive assessments, academic assessments, memory assessments, attention deficit disorder, speech and language and therapy notes, occupational therapy notes, IEP records, all of those things where you have somebody that's evaluating with fidelity using research-based tools that could document with percentiles and numbers the extent of the disability. So just saying that somebody has depression or anxiety isn't enough. You have to have the documentation of the diagnosis, and it has to be all done through lab work and through doctors' letters. The tests that they're looking for this have to be done within hopefully the last year. I think they can go back a couple years beyond that, but they want current documentation. They don't want an IQ test that was done when they were 7 or 8 years old. They want a current scores. Therapy records, and I think this is important for this population because of the mental health component to 22q. These records have to show the records of therapy over time. It has to show that this is a chronic issue. So to basically say my child has anxiety, but they've never been seen by a doctor for treatment for anxiety and haven't been, they may not be on any medication, there may not be any records. You have to have all that documentation to say that anxiety is a problem that is prohibiting them from working full time. So therapy records over time. School summaries should include detailed notes over a period of years of how this 22q has impacted that child in the classroom, out of the classroom, socially, communication-wise, and so on. The evidence list that you would have is medical history and diagnosis of 22q, the clinical and lab findings, treatment that has been prescribed and with documented response and the prognosis, a statement about what your child can do even despite his or her impairment, and how they would be able to perform work-related activities and their ability to understand, carry out, remember instructions, work at a job setting. If they've never had a job, it's kind of hard to know how they would do, which is one of the reasons I really work with school districts to try to give kids with this syndrome some type of work experience, even if it's a volunteer position, so that data can be collected on how that youngster handles that job. And I think that's the type of evidence that is very good evidence to give to Social Security Determination Bureau. If they've tried a job and it has not been successful, this is evidence. So you have to give them opportunities to show what can they do and what are the barriers to employment. How are they having trouble? What kind of supports do they need in order to be successful? So Social Security has a listing of impairments, and I put the website on there that you can go to actually click through this and see what this listing of impairments say. Now, everybody with 22q, although you have the genetic deletion, there are other issues that come into play with this. So some adults may have certain things that are related to 22q, and other adults have other issues. So there isn't a one size fits all with this determination. You have to, though, familiarize yourself with what Social Security is looking at in order to be able to show where your child may be able to qualify. So for this particular syndrome, the areas that are indicated on that listing would be the following. So there's one area that's called congenital disorders that affect multiple body systems. Well, 22q is a congenital genetic disorder that affects multiple body systems. So that is something that would fall under that category. Many youngsters with this have an intellectual disability and learning impairments. Many also have mental health issues, anxiety, personality disorders, or some of them develop more significant psychiatric problems. The majority of adults with this have communication difficulties that would impair their ability to communicate effectively. Many have physical challenges, although most of them don't have something that by itself is going to raise to the level of an impairment for physical. But when you combine physical with the rest of these, it's another tick in the box of what, is a barrier to employment. 22q comes with its own sort of autistic-like behaviors of social impairments that could make it difficult on the job. Many are diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, which is difficulty with attention to tasks, pace, and initiation. There's widespread executive functioning issues, which gets into the daily living issues. And in my mind, for this syndrome, you have to take a combination of all of these things and then lump that together for the presentation to Social Security. So this is not just one area. It is a multitude of areas that exist within the 22q population. So the impact of the impairment, if we're talking about a cognitive or intellectual disorder, it has to result in marked limitation in physical functioning and a marked limitation in at least one of the 4 areas of mental functioning. So understanding, remembering, applying information, interacting with others, concentrating, persisting, maintaining pace, adapting, or managing oneself. Well, the schools can comment on a lot of this for kids. Do they have an aid in class? Are they having a hard time remembering class assignments? Do they have a difficult time interacting with others in school? Are they having a hard time with completing things, or are they distracted? Do they maintain pace? Can they work at a fast pace that would be needed on a job? So this is something that teachers are observing all the time and could make comments on this, as well as neuropsychological testing can put documented numbers on these things. It has to address how the impairment actually impacts this child. So again, neurological testing, therapy notes, and IEP documentation. I would also suggest that families write a letter, a cover letter to Social Security that would address their child and these types of issues. What is life like with your child? What amount of cleanup is there all the time? How much are you regulating their life? How independent are they? How much do you have to help them with making sure their assignments are handed in or that tasks are completed? around the house? If you tell them to do things, do they remember to do it? How much help do they need? That's the kind of information I think that would be very helpful for families to supply. Because you're living with this child, you understand the amount of work that you need to have to do in order for them to appear functional, but there's a lot of scaffolding of support that is happening behind the scenes. Now, for an intellectual disability, they go for an IQ test, an IQ score. And in this syndrome, the research has shown that there is a drop in IQ scores over time. For many, not everybody with the syndrome, but a lot of kids with the syndrome, the research is showing that there is a drop in scores. Now, I want to say there is not a loss of skills. So I don't want you to feel that the kids are regressing, but they're not gaining those inferential thinking and higher level thinking skills at the pace that their peers are gaining those. So when the IQ test is given, their score is lower than it was before because they have not gained the skills that you would anticipate they will have gained. So I would recommend that you do an IQ test right before you're planning to apply for Social Security, if you do not have a score that is going to qualify them ahead of time. I have seen, over having looked at, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of these neuropsych tests for kids with this syndrome, that many times by the time they're ready to exit high school, scores are hovering right in the area that's on the screen. So you have a child who is low average or average before, but right at exit high school time, their score is more like a 70 or a 72 or so on. So a 70 or below is going to be considered having an intellectual disability, but they've changed this a little bit now that a scores from 71 to 75, they're giving a little bit of leeway here, which should help our population because you can qualify, there's a little fudge room here. If there's one of the two scores is below 70, many kids with 22Q have a performance IQ that's below that score. That's the typical profile. So they may be able to qualify with a lower partial score on this. But there also needs to be, in addition to the score, significant deficits in adaptive functioning. So again, we're looking at the same criteria: understanding, remembering, and applying information. Same thing as we had on the previous slide. Social skills, interacting with others. Concentration, that's your attention deficit issues, persisting and maintaining pace, or being able to adapt and manage oneself. And in that area, I'm thinking about your activities of daily living, your ability to do budgeting, your ability to be safe in the community, your ability to have good judgment. Those are all under those adaptive functional skills. So that's what goes into the intellectual disability criteria for Social Security. In our case with 22Q, the disorder began prior to the age attainment of 22. The kids were born with this disability, so they should be able to qualify as this happening before age 22. Now, the anxiety or mental health piece, which is also, I think, a very, very important issue with the 22Q population. Here are the areas of anxiety disorder that are listed in the Social Security manual. But so fatigue, difficulty concentrating, being irritable, having some type of phobia. There's all kinds of anxiety. Some kids with the syndrome have a history of school phobia. So they've withdrawn and they've had trouble going to school. So we have to have a limitation here. And also the same limitations that we had previous slide with that ability to function in the world, having the anxiety. But what's important with this as well is it has to be serious and persistent. So they're looking for an anxiety disorder that has occurred for more than just a month or so. that it's lasted for a period of years. I know I've worked with many families who have had kids that have had struggles with this that have gone back for years. They've seen doctors over time. All of this is what you need to present to Social Security to show that this has been an issue. You've sought out medical treatment. You have put supports in place. You have needed to scaffold the environment, including home and school, to address it, and that you are doing your best to address this, but it's being addressed because the environment is highly structured. And even though your child is going to school and they're functioning, that might be true, but it's because you're such great parents and the teachers in school have been really helping the child, and all kinds of supports have been put in place in the IEP. And that is why the child is being able to be successful. Take all those supports away and the anxiety disorder can be considered serious and persistent. So you're seeing that this is a judgment call. So what is, how persistent is it? How difficult is it? Where is your documentation? And psychiatrists and psychologists can write fabulous letters that would support you in this if this is an issue for your child. But those letters need to find their way to Social Security. You can't just write they have anxiety and not give the full scope of how this anxiety impacts this young adult. The congenital disorders that affect multiple body systems, I wanted to put this out there. This particular category does not specifically mention 22q, but I've highlighted in yellow where it says chromosomal disorders. So I think that's 22q. I mean, it's a documented genetic disorder. And so again, they're looking at the degree of how this impacts your child. And that, there's a wide variability in this syndrome of how much a child is impacted by this. So you have to show what all of those areas are and all the different body systems that are impacted. So again, this is a subjective scale. Somebody is making a determination. They're reading all of this documentation and they're trying to decide, is this a marked limitation or an extreme limitation? Because the rules are saying, is it severe enough? How much is this actually impacting? So is the functioning in this area so severe that you cannot really act, this young adult would not be able to act independently, appropriately, and effectively on a sustained basis without support? That's what they're really looking at. And I think that's the question that really families have a hard time grappling with is, is my child, is my young adult at that level that is going to raise it to the red level, the marked limitation or extreme limitation? How much is how much? And, am I holding my child back, or are they really going to need this support on a long-term basis? And really, that's a family decision. It's a very personal family decision that I think every family with this syndrome really needs to ask themselves when their young child gets to that age of exiting out of high school. What am I going to need to support him or her long-term for the rest of their life? Because really, that's what we're talking about, is we're setting them up in a system that is going to be there for them indefinitely. So the school system has a very important part in this whole process. That exiting IEP document has to be honest. It has to convey the level of impairment and the level of limitations. I've looked at a lot of IEPs that have said, well, this is a lovely person, they're giving all kinds of accolades, and not saying what everybody in the room knows. And that is that there is a lot of help that's being provided, that the work is all being modified, that the child needs a lot of scaffolding, that there is an aide in the classroom. So with this last IEP, this IEP that's going to Social Security, which would be, you know, that high school IEP, do not sugarcoat needs in this document. You want to be really brutally honest about what that child is going to be able to do unsupported in adult life, college, vocational school, or employment. The goals that they set up in that IEP need to be SMART goals. They need to be specific. You have to be able to measure them. They should be attainable. They should be results oriented, and they need to have some time bound element to them. And in another webinar, we can spend time on writing goals and how to write these goals. But these transition IEPs should be very technically written and very specific. I mean, if the child is not counting change, they're not able to move into the adult world in a functional capacity if they don't know how to count money. So what is it that they really need to have in these goals, and how are they going to be exited with this? What type of transition program is really needed in an honest way to prepare them for life as an adult? Every teen that leaves high school with an IEP is supposed to have a document called the Summary of Performance. It's provided by the IEP team. It is supposed to give a summary of the academic achievement, so the level of competency in reading, writing, math, a summary of their functional skills. And this is the area that should be very specific. Can they navigate public transportation? Are they able to balance a checkbook? Can they administer their own medication? Are they able to cook? What skills do they have, and what do they need to be independent? Then it should have recommendations for that child to meet those goals, and how is that going to be provided? And really, for a teen with 22Q, that transition program provided under IDEA through the school district really should be very detailed and extensive. Much, much, much more so than what I typically see when I see high school IEPs for this population. When I talk about functional skills, this slide is going to give you the kinds of things that would be on that statement of performance, summary of performance document. You know, what kinds of things would they really need to be able to do in order for you to feel good about them being in their own apartment and being kind of on their own? And safe, which I think as parents, you know, everybody's really worried that their kids are going to make good choices and be safe in the environment. Handling stress, being able to handle their medications, making decisions, all of that. That should all be part of the transition program. And the webinar will be online. So if you're not getting all these notes down and want to go back through these slides, I know I put a lot of information on these slides on purpose so that people could go back and look at this again. It's being recorded, and you know, you can take your time going through and making sure that you're thinking about all these different things. So that kind of brings us to graduation. And this is really a question that I get a lot from families. What do I do when my child, you know, the school is saying that they've completed all their requirements for graduation, even though they're in modified classes or they're in special education classes, the school is saying that they're ready to graduate. Well, they have a right under IDEA to be in school until age 22. And the requirements really vary from state to state. I'm surprised in Maine, for example, they don't go up to age 22, but you know, most of the time it's to age 22. But here's the kicker. The U.S. Department of Education states that a regular high school diploma is the standard high school diploma awarded to the preponderance of students in a state that is fully aligned with the state standards. That's your Common Core standards. So in order for them to technically graduate at age 18, they should be able to basically be able to do those Common Core standard level of material. So just because they passed a special education math class, if they can't count money and they're saying, well, they've completed all their math requirements, I have a problem with that, because what they have attained is not considered that high school level of competency. Is it fair to graduate kids who are taking significantly modified coursework and strip them of programming that they have a right to between ages 18 and 21 just because they've gone to school and passed the classes? And furthermore, how does graduating at age 18 actually impact qualifying for Social Security and SSI? What does that diploma tell Social Security? Social Security is looking at that diploma as being fully aligned with the state standards. So you have to be very careful about what that IEP says and what you're planning for a transition program. Now, if they're graduating at age 18 and going to a college that is a life skills college, or a college that is working on these functional skills instead of working on those during a transition program, that may be looked at slightly differently by Social Security. But those transition programs, ages 18 to 22, can include community college. They can include other work experiences, vocational training, and still be under a transition plan under IDEA and not jeopardize that young adult's ability to get Social Security by getting, quote unquote, a regular high school diploma that they haven't really earned, that they're just being exited out with no plan. So you have to be really careful about that. There are some kids with the syndrome that are highly functional. They're able to get through the high school curriculum with pretty much fidelity, maybe a little bit of help here and there, but they're pretty set and they are ready to go off to some type of post-secondary training. But the majority of kids with this syndrome are kind of in that gray area where the school wants to send them on their way, but there are all of these functional skills that are necessary for them to be successful that are not covered at that point. So food for thought there. Be knowledgeable and realistic about what the child needs. I would ask family members, I would talk about this as, the parents, ask friends, ask teachers, really have a heart-to-heart with the teacher, because these are really critical decisions right now, and they're hard decisions. I remember the same point in time in my own life with my young child, my young adult now with 22Q, trying to figure out, am I doing the right thing here? What do I do? But I knew in my heart that he needed this support. And so that was a decision that was right for me to put together a transition plan for him. It may be a different thing with your child. I'm not living in the home with all of you. I can't, put myself in your situation, but I will caution you that this is a really critical time to think long and hard about how much support you think that young adult is going to need long term. Make sure that your school district invites community agencies to the IEP meetings starting at age 16 so that you understand what services will be available and when. Are there wait lists? The school district can say, well, they can get on the vocational rehab roster, but then vocational rehab comes to the meeting and says, yes, but we've got a 3-year wait list. Or they can get in the Health and Human Services program, but there's a wait list of 7 years for that program. So make sure you understand, if they're going to hand that off to another agency, what the wait list is and what your child is going to need to be eligible for that service. And if it's Social Security and they don't have Social Security, then what happens if they don't get approved for Social Security? Are you then out in the cold with nothing? So make sure you understand, and this varies from state to state. I would say don't be intimidated by districts who say that their program for students 18 to 21 is only for the most cognitively disabled students. Every child with a disability that needs functional skills should, under IDEA, qualify for programming. And I have advocated very successfully for many families with 22Q with their IEP teams pulling together these transition programs when they were set to graduate, and it was clear that the children were not at all ready to hit the workforce or to go to college. The district has to provide an individualized program that is in the least restrictive environment and appropriate for a teen with 22Q. So again, do not be intimidated by a school district that tells you the only program we have is for our most cognitively disabled children, and if you don't graduate, you have to be in that program. That's absolutely not correct. The program can be totally individualized for your child at a level appropriate for them. That program can involve work, vocational training, community college classes, and functional skills training. But graduating at age 18 with a very poorly written transition IEP can really seriously jeopardize your child's likelihood of ever getting SSI and adult services. So the reason that I was so strongly wanting to put this together for the community is I want you guys armed and ready to understand what you're coming up against at this very, very critical time of transitioning into adult life. To apply for, oh, go ahead, Kapil.
Sorry, before you get into the how to apply, just really quickly, one thing is it's 9 o'clock. So for those of you that are still with us, I think we've had a great turnout. Thank you. We're probably going to take another 10 or 15 minutes to go finish the presentation and then do Q&A. So feel free to either stick with us or we'll make the recording available, as Donna had mentioned. And then for those that have been typing some questions into the chat box, into the Q&A, I'm making a list of those as well for Donna, and so we will be getting there.
Okay, so we've gone over the main things. This is just a recap. We're just about done with this presentation. So, get your documentation, get your IEP written very honestly, get current neuropsych testing, get articles about 22Q. I can supply you with articles. I'm happy to, work with all of you guys to give you great articles. Write a letter that explains your child, keeping in mind the guidelines that we talked about for Social Security, and really work with your school district to pull together a fair transition plan for your young adult. These are the main things with transition. I have 2 slides here that you can just look through very quickly together. But the transition program goes beyond academics. So there's a lot of things that are involved with this, including living arrangements and medical supervision and figuring out your finances, monetary support, figuring out trust funds, and so on. And then some other issues like dating and marriage and kids and drugs and, all of those adult things that we all worry about, regardless of whether our kids have 22Q or not. So all those things need to be brought up and discussed and worked through with your young adult with the syndrome. So I hope that I haven't totally overwhelmed you with this webinar. There is help with this through the 22Q Family Foundation. If you feel that you're not sure what to do and would like to speak personally with me, I'm more than happy to work with you. The foundation also offers some transition assistance for career choices and job applications and interviewing skills and all of that. You can find us at the 22qfamilyfoundation.org. And then I also wanted to introduce to the community a person that I ran across. His name is Dr. Ken Mangus. He's out of Cincinnati, Ohio. I had him work actually with a family from Texas that just got approved. And it was really thanks to a wonderful report that he pulled together. He has a background as an expert witness in SSI appeals and hearings, but what I found most interesting about him, he is a psychologist. He can do testing to determine whether or not a young adult could have gainful employment and just where their skills are. But he also used to work for Social Security. So he was on the Determination Bureau. So he totally understands what they're looking for and how to pull these records together, and what kinds of things you might need. If you're at that critical time and you think you need somebody for expert help, I'm just throwing out his name. He is now knowledgeable about 22Q and has worked with some families in the community. So he's learning more and more every day and is an overall great person. He is able to do virtual conferencing as well. So it doesn't mean that you have to live in Cincinnati to use his services. So you're not alone. So we're here to help you. And I hope that we can build a strong program together that leaves every child with this syndrome with what they need to be successful as adults. So that is the presentation.
Thank you, Donna. That was absolutely awesome and super helpful. And I'm seeing some of the comments come in that are mirroring that as well. So, I see, and yes, it is a steep learning curve, but we have lots and lots of resources. There's some amazing groups on Facebook and support communities, both through the 22Q Family Foundation and others. Donna, I feel like this is something that is really intimidating and scary to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so, it sounds like the key points here are really knowing your child, having a good team in place that can help you advocate for your child, and documentation.
Yes.
Right? I think they're organized. It sounds like that's a huge part of the battle.
And I think I want to feel for the community that what we're doing is opening doors, not closing doors. I think sometimes by getting that disability label, you feel like you're closing doors. But what you're really doing is opening doors for support and allowing that young adult to flourish independently and out of your home with other eyes on them in other, aspects of community, because it allows them to work with support in a job. Gives them the resources. So in my mind, it really is gaining opportunities rather than not. So.
Yep. No, I love it. So I think, a couple of things that we have questions on, one, a couple of them are around kids that have either recently received their diploma or are graduating and that may not have received an SOP or kind of a transitional IEP. Is there any sort of recourse to that? And also, as Donna mentioned, we have, there's obviously the vocational resources out there that are options for people to use. And we should always try and use as many avenues as possible. But we have Jason Osborne as our career pathways career coach through the 22Q Family Foundation. And his support is free of charge as well. He volunteers his time and spends time with both parents and the kids that have 22Q, to young adults that have 22Q, even adults, by the way. It's not just limited to people that are transitioning. We met someone recently at Nationwide Children's, and they said, look, I'm in my 40s or 50s. Is it okay? And I said, yes, absolutely. We can help you with that. Understanding what the skills are and being able to help you understand how to transition and look for a job, how to find something that's going to be both fulfilling and meet your needs. But, Donna, what would you say to people that didn't get a good SOP or a good transitional IEP?
All right. That's $100,000 question right there, because when you sign the dotted line and accept that diploma, basically the school district is done. Now, if it is just recently, mm-hmm. there is a chance that you could file through mediation or due process to say that they have not fulfilled their obligations under IDEA. So that would be an attorney question for a special education attorney to go back once the child is graduated. If the child has not graduated, In other words, if they're slated for graduation in December or in June, we've still got time. Then then we can intervene immediately. They have not gotten the diploma. So this would be the critical time to say, hey, wait a minute, where's the transition plan
Sure.
here? And that's the point where you still have a chance to get something pulled together.
Okay, and then we have another question here from Deb Yost, and she was saying, what are the benefits or supports that are common for kids that are on the higher spectrum of 22q adults, young adults that are on the higher spectrum that can be capable of holding a job even over the threshold of income per month? And so, are there other services or supports? Like, what other forms of scaffolding would you recommend for them?
Well, some of these programs can be purchased with parent funding. So, for example, you can pay for a fiscal representative payee to handle the finances. So that's something that parents can pay for out of pocket. It's not that expensive, I don't think, really per month with that. If they're able to work on a job without any additional support, then I don't suppose you might be able to pay for a mentor. There could be volunteer organizations that would be willing to mentor. I mean, you're going to have to look kind of out of the box because they wouldn't qualify under Health and Human Services, but they may qualify under the Department of Vocational Rehab. That program may not be a program that they're excluded from. The other program with care support, like the medical appointments and those kinds of things, one place that you might look at for that, which I just found out about actually for our son with the syndrome, is that sometimes hospitals have case management. Yep. So you may be able to get a nurse case manager for adult with the syndrome that needs additional medication and help with interpreting at medical appointments. So that could be through the health insurance program. So it's a matter of thinking out of the box with it. But it's good that he's higher functioning, and that there are some adults with this that are higher functioning. Yep. So it's a fine line to figure out what's needed.
Okay. Let's see. There's someone, Isel had said that their school had failed to help their son transition, so we covered that. And I think Nancy had some questions about, who makes the determinations, and it happened to be during the time that you were talking about that. So, I guess from my experience, our son is only 5.5, but we started seeing a neurodevelopmental pediatrician early. We got in there just at his 5th birthday, I think, or just before he turned 5. Usually 5 is around the time where I think they're able to actually do an assessment. And so our philosophy was, look, here in Chicago at Lurie's, there's a usually 16 to 18 month wait to get into either neurodevelopmental pediatricians or to psychology, psychiatry. So I said, let's just get in there now to be able to get a baseline before we start seeing symptoms of anxiety, to be able to build as many of the scaffolding and the supports that we can ahead of time. And, as I'm listening to this presentation, and something I had mentioned to Donna ahead of time as well, was that, a lot of these stats look daunting, or not even stats, just the information you have to collect. And I don't want to feel like, hey, son, I'm putting you down, or I'm putting you in a position where I think you're less than. No, it's not that at all. I think that we have this challenge as a 22q community where everything is so unique to the individuals, not only in the collection of symptoms of the 180 plus that are possible, but the degree of variability in the way that those present. And so as parents, we need to be able to kind of swallow that pill and really be able to give our kids a true assessment, not of their character flaws or character traits, but from a developmental and functional perspective, what really are your strengths and weaknesses? Where do you need help to be a successful individual and a member of the community? And I don't want to say contributing, because what? Maybe you're going to have supports in terms of both your living facility, your day-to-day functioning, executive functioning. A lot of us, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of us face these things on a day-in, day-out basis, even without 22q. But the degree that can be limiting in your level of independence long-term. And let's be honest about that, because I think those honest conversations then allow us to have a better relationship with our children. We're not pushing them in directions that they don't feel comfortable going, and or we're understanding what their fears are to be able to help them figure out, where can you go if you need this level of help or this type of help or this type of a support. There's resources, including us as parents, out there. And so where can you turn? If you don't want to go to your parents first, what are alternatives you can seek before you come to us? I just, these are all, I think, just great conversations to have. And, I would just reiterate that, Donna, you're an absolute gem for putting this together. This has been a really, really informative presentation. And I think that, it's just good to put these things out there in the open and to start those discussions, because they're not as intimidating as they seem once we start working together on it as a community. And so unless there's other questions, it's 9:15, and I'm just going to say, Donna mentioned a number of resources. We're going to make this presentation available to everyone that registered. They will get a link to a recording of it. We'll also put it on a private YouTube channel so that people in our Honest Conversations group can access it and elsewhere. And then, if you have questions, again, my name is Kapil. Feel free to email me, KAPIL @22qfamilyfoundation.org. Lindsay is our executive director, and she coordinates with Donna and with Jason to provide people both our IEP services so people can get time with Donna one-on-one to talk about their specific issues, and Jason, who gets one-on-one time with the young adults and adults that are actually transitioning, as well as their parents, to talk about alternatives to or additional supports to programs like vocational rehab. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Donna, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everybody. It's been my pleasure to present this to the community, and I hope it was a helpful presentation. So thanks, everybody.
I love it. Everyone have a great night. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. I think that stopped it.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're good.